Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the TimeformUS Road to the Derby series, where we analyze the prep races leading up to that first Saturday in May, the Kentucky Derby. This weekend, it's the culmination of the Fairgrounds path to the Kentucky Derby. That is race 14 on Saturday at the Fairgrounds, the Grade 2 Louisiana Derby, $1 million purse to the winner of this race. Also 100 Derby qualifying points on the line for the winner. Let's throw up the field for this race. We've got 8 signed on, some familiar faces from this Louisiana route to the Derby, including the winner of the Risen Star, Mandaloun, and the 2 horses that finished right behind him, Proxy and Midnight Bourbon. But we've actually got 6 horses in total that are exiting that Risen Star. Just 2 horses in this race coming out of different races, and actually one of them is also based at the Fairgrounds Run Classic. Additionally, there is a shipper in this race, the number 5 Hot Rod Charlie. Just on the morning line before I started recording this video, Mandaloun is the 8-5 morning line favorite. I imagine he will be the significant favorite based on that victory as the choice last time in the Risen Star, but there are other horses coming out of that race that finished behind him who should also attract support, and that new shooter from California, Hot Rod Charlie, also figures to take some money. Before we get to the contenders, let's look at the TimeformUS pace projector for this race, and you see that the 2 horses projected to be out towards the front end are the same 2 horses that were towards the front in the Risen Star last time, those being the number 2 Right and Just and the number 7 Midnight Bourbon. The TimeformUS pace projector is coding this as a fast pace. You see that red bar in the upper right-hand corner. I'm not sure how fast they're going to be going on the front end, though, because like I said, these are the same 2 horses that were involved in the pace last time, and they didn't exactly set quick fractions in the Risen Star. It was an honest pace that set it up for a horse coming with any kind of running style, but they certainly weren't blazing up front. And the horses that are shown right in behind these 2, the number 3 Run Classic, the number 4 Proxy, and the number 6 Mandaloun, none of those are really front-running types that you would expect to press the pace. So I think we're likely to see a more moderate pace. The one wild card in that situation could be the number 1 Star in My Dreams, who we'll get to in a little bit. He's shown farther back on the pace projector, but he has been competitive in some paces in the past. So if he gets a cleaner break this time, he might be able to more forwardly place than the pace projector indicates. Let's move into the favorites, and we'll march right through the top few finishers in that Risen Star Stakes, as most of the horses in this field are coming out of that event, beginning with the number 6 Mandaloun, that aforementioned favorite. And he just does seem like the horse to beat in this Louisiana Derby. He's 3 for 4 in his career. The one disappointment was 2 back in the Lecomte when he was a little wide around both terms, beaten by Midnight Bourbon and Proxy, who are both in this race. But he turned the tables on those 2 horses last time out in the Risen Star, and I liked everything about that performance. He got a pretty similar trip to the Lecomte, stalking wide around the turns, but he kicked much more strongly in the stretch, seemed to relish every bit of that 1 1/8 distance. He's just stretching out an extra 16th today to go the 1 3/16. I don't foresee him having any problem with that. The Into Mischief, sometimes they have a reputation as being more miler types, but there's plenty of dam side pedigree to go longer. His Dam Brooch was a graded stakes winner in Ireland, going distances from 1 mile out to 1 3/16 today's distance. So I don't think Mandaloun's going to really struggle with the added ground, and he just seems like the horse to beat. But it's not like he was so much the best over his 2 foes in the Risen Star that I want to accept a very short price on him, because I think the 2 horses that finished directly behind him also do have some talent. So I think the one concern with Mandaloun is potentially an underlaid price. Moving on to the horse that finished right behind Mandaloun last time, that's the number 4 Proxy. He was actually the runner-up in both the Lecomte and the Risen Star, so he beat Mandaloun 2 back and was beaten by that horse last time. And Proxy, kind of like Mandaloun, just seems like a horse that's slowly but surely figuring it out and getting better with added distance. He's a grinder type. He doesn't have any big turn of foot in him, but he just keeps staying on very gamely at the end of his races, has a lot of grit, his performances. We saw that in 2 back in the Lecomte, where it looked like he was going to settle for 3rd, and he clawed his way back into 2nd at the very end over Mandaloun. And last time, he was a little farther back than Mandaloun around the far turn, made a wide run into the stretch, and got there at the end, and was really the only horse that was making up ground on the winner at the very end of the race. Not doing so in any spectacular fashion, but he was just steadily plugging away and chipping away at that winning margin. So this horse has continued to run well since the beginning of his career. He's never been out of the exact in 5 career starts. I expect another step forward. It's just a question of whether or not that step forward is enough to beat Mandaloun. And one additional point about Proxy, he's putting blinkers on for this race. And it's not a great stat for his trainer, Mike Stidham. I looked up the statistic in Formulator. Over the past 5 years, blinkers on the dirt. He's 5 for 50, just 10% with an ROI of 64 cents. So that's not a positive move. So I wouldn't really move Proxy up based on that. Though, just in theory, he is a horse that has looked somewhat unfocused in a few of his races. So perhaps the blinkers give him that added focus he needs to put him over the top. Moving on to the horse that completed the trifecta in the Risen Star last time. That's the number 7, Midnight Bourbon. And as I showed the TimeformUS pace projector towards the top of the episode, he's a horse that is projected to be towards the front end in this race, probably stalking the number 2, Right and Just. He really had no excuse last time in the Risen Star. I thought he got a very good trip, stalking what appeared to be a moderate pace. He had his chance, briefly got to the lead between calls, but was just run down by Mandaloon first and then by Proxy in the late stages of that race. Perhaps he's just third best of those 2 horses, though he did beat them 2 back in the Lecomte. But I think it's worth stressing that the Lecomte really set up for a front runner. Some speed scratched out of that race. He got to control things on the front end. That's unlikely to happen in the same way here. It just feels like maybe the other 2 that defeated him last time are on a bit more of an upward trajectory than Midnight Bourbon is. But I've got nothing against this horse other than that. I mean, he's run some competitive speed figures. He's bred to go this distance. He's bred to really win this race because he's a half-brother to Gervin, who was the Louisiana Derby winner a few years ago. I just feel like maybe others have some more upside in this spot. A couple of horses that were off the board in the Risen Star, beginning with the number 8, Obesos. He was 4th that day, and you might remember he was my selection that day at a big price, 21-1. He outran his odds to be 4th in that spot, but watching that race, I did get the feeling that the 1 1/8 distance was perhaps pushing Obesos past his limit. He's a horse that showed a lot of promise sprinting early in his career with a big electrifying turn of foot from off the pace. And we didn't see that same turn of foot going the 2 turns last time. He was trying to launch a run around the far turn, but really flattened out in the last 1/8 of a mile. So I'm not foreseeing that an extra 16th is going to help him at all. It actually might hurt him a little bit. And I just don't think he's the kind of horse that's really well suited for this race. But he is one that I would look for in the future when he eventually turns back in distance, because as I said, he did show a lot of promise sprinting early in his career. I just think this Louisiana Derby is potentially the wrong spot for him. And then the final horse I want to talk about from that Risen Star is the number 1, Star in My Dreams. And when I mentioned the TimeformUS pace projector and him being a little farther back, well, you see his 3 prior performances, and his last one maybe is weighing heavily on that pace projector and why he's projected a little further back in the pack than some other horses coming out of the Risen Star. And if the beginning of that race, I think, had a big influence on where he was placed, because you see the Comet, he was legitimately off slowly from an inside post position, and from there just got steady back a little bit, was very rank heading into the first turn. Brian Hernandez was trying to get him to settle, but he was just fighting the rider heading into that clubhouse turn, had to steady off heels, interfere with another horse as he was drifting out into that clubhouse turn. So just a really discombobulated start for Star in My Dreams. The problem is he never overcame that adversity and faded very badly in the latter half of that race. So we don't really know how good he ultimately is, because his first 2 starts, well, they were solid enough and they both resulted in victories. He wasn't facing anywhere near the kind of competition that he's going to be meeting in this Louisiana Derby. So he's a price in this race if you like him. He's actually 20-1 on the morning line. I just couldn't quite convince myself to use him based on the poor effort last time, even though he had that trouble. I'm just not sure he's quite in the same league as these. So one more horse to talk about, and that's that shipper from California, who is pretty intriguing to me. That's the number 5, Hot Rod Charlie, coming in formerly trained by Doug O'Neill. He's listed as being trained by his assistant Leandro Moore for this race. Doug O'Neill serving a brief suspension, so that's why there's the trainer switch for this race. But for all intents and purposes, this horse is still trained by Doug O'Neill, and he's just run really well ever since they stretched him out in distance to 2 turns on the dirt. We saw him go the same 2-turn configuration 2 back in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He ran very well that day to be 2nd, and he came back in his 3-year-old debut last time in the Robert B. Lewis. Let's take a look at that race. It was a pretty tough spot to come off the layoff, because you had a nice Bob Baffert horse in Medina Spirit, the improving Roman Centurion. Those 2 horses are on the rail on the outside, and there's Hot Rod Charlie battling between them. And all things considered, him coming off a 2.5, nearly 3-month layoff into this race, he puts in a pretty game performance battling on between these two. Briefly looks like he might resurge and get the win, but he ends up settling for third, beaten just to neck in this race. But I thought it was a really solid effort for a horse coming off the layoff. Unlike the horse that was on the outside, Roman Centurion, who got a great pace setup to close into, Hot Rod Charlie was sort of in the middle of the pack, so he made an earlier move into that quick pace that you see coded in red in the TimeformUS PPs, but the horse that obviously ran best was Medina Spirit. The thing that I like most about that Robert B. Lewis is that it's proven to be a very strong race. It got a 112 TimeformUS speed figure, at least Hot Rod Charlie did, but horses have come back to validate and even flatter that race since then, because Medina Spirit came back, and while he was beaten by Life is Good next time in the San Felipe, he improved his TimeformUS speed figure up to a 120. Roman Centurion, who was second in that Robert B. Lewis, he came back and was a good fourth in the San Felipe with the same speed figure. And the fourth place finisher, Spielberg, who was beaten a long way by Hot Rod Charlie, came back and ran a 114 TimeformUS speed figure when he was second in the Southwest to Essential Quality, last year's champion, who Hot Rod Charlie finished just behind in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile. I like the way this horse is coming along. I think he can take a step forward second off the layoff. I've watched a couple of his recent workouts, and it seems like he's really stepped forward in his training since that Robert B. Lewis. The one question is the distance. Some might hold it against him that he's a half-brother to Mitoli, not because Mitoli is anything to sneeze at from a quality standpoint, certainly not, but Mitoli was a champion sprinter, and Hot Rod Charlie's trying to go longer. But Hot Rod Charlie looks like a completely different horse from a physical standpoint and from the way he races than Mitoli does. I think he takes much more after his sire Oxbow, who won the Preakness Stakes. So I think Hot Rod Charlie might appreciate this distance, and he's going to be my top pick in this Louisiana Derby. Let's throw out my picks for this race. I landed on the number 5, Hot Rod Charlie, over the 3 horses from the Louisiana Derby, but in a slightly different order. I put Proxy second, thinking he might be able to move forward a little bit. This number 6, Mandaloon, third. Just not sure about the value he's going to offer, but I certainly respect what he's done on the racetrack. And the number 7, Midnight Bourbon, fourth. So it's the number 5, Hot Rod Charlie for me. He's 3-1 in the morning line. I think that's a very fair price on him. We'll see if he drifts up from that. At some of the recent star horses take a bit more money, but he's my pick in the Louisiana Derby on Saturday at the fairgrounds.